what is the sharing economy? What do we mean by that term? And is it universally understood to mean the same thing?
That's an easy question to start with. First off, thanks to the organizers. I'm really happy to be back. I think the first time I was at the World Government Summit was 2016, so I've had a long-standing relationship with the event. The sharing economy is not universally understood to mean one thing. I think of it as a new way of organizing economic activity that decentralizes certain things. Instead of having a company selling directly to consumers, you have a platform sitting in between. On one side, you have consumers looking for something. It could be transportation services through Uber or Careem. It could be short-term accommodation through platforms like Airbnb. But the idea is broader. We've seen the decentralization of the provision of video entertainment through platforms like YouTube. We've seen the decentralization of retail through platforms like Amazon and others. And so I think more and more of the world's workforce, more and more people, instead of working for a company and drawing a salary, are ending up in other kinds of micro-entrepreneurial work arrangements, which have been brought to the fore by the popularity of the sharing economy over the last few years, and I guess motivated this panel.
Yeah. Well, and Arun, you're getting to my next question, which I'll stick with you for, which is how the sharing economy contributes to the labor market. What are some of the contributions we've seen? What are some of the other effects? What are some of the kind of high-level relationships there?
Well, I think that it's caused a shift away from salaried work to other kinds of quasi-entrepreneurial activity. Clearly running a store on Amazon or being a Careem or Uber driver doesn't have the same scope of entrepreneurialism as setting up your own shop in a mall, for example. The lift is less. And so the lines kind of blur between working for someone and working for yourself. And I think that this leads to a lot of problems in measuring exactly what participation in the labor market is, because we're used to counting the number of employees, looking at the unemployment numbers. But if you don't intend to be employed ever, then the metric of unemployment starts to become a less and less precise measure of how many people are or are not participating in being productive in society.
Yeah. It strikes me as a non-expert, these are not semantic differences. These are fundamental questions that these relationships are raising. And so why don't we go to
Absolutely.
Another question for both of you, and we'll start with Dileep. What kinds of issues, what kinds of public policy issues do you observe when it comes to the intersection of the sharing economy and the labor market, however you define them, however you experience them?
First, I guess I would want to say that the policies between policies addressing sharing economy or gig work and policies that address mainstream labor policies, labor markets, I think in essence they are the same, and in essence they don't work very well. So there is much to be done on both on the formal sector as well as formal employment as well as informal employment, and then the new way of working, which is the future of work in a way, the sharing economy and the gig work. So, if that difference is very stark when you look at the global north and the global south. In the global north, when you have full employment, people already have work, a lot of formality there mostly. There is some illegality too, but mostly formality and formalized. And then you are doing innovation and then trying to save or maximize benefits to the workers as well as to the owners of assets that they are sharing, whether it is the car owners or whether it is the house owners or whether it is the owners of the work or the talent that people have, right? So the platforms that enable sharing of demand and supply, they add a lot of value there, but at the margin. You take that situation to a developing country where unemployment rate is high, private property laws are not clear, proprietary, what is the word, intellectual property rights are not very clean, and contracts are not properly enforced. And in that setup, you throw in the sharing economy, when there is a pool of unemployed people, it's not clear to me how we can address that through policies. For sure, the reason there is a formal market and a job is guarded like gold, and another one is informal market where there is sharing economy. The reason that is there is not enough flexibility in the market. It's built in. Inflexibility, rigidity is built in. Sharing economy can chip away at it. So I really think that it is beneficial both in global north and in global south. But in the global south, there is quite a bit of challenge in terms of forming regulations on sharing economy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I think that the blurring of the lines between the issues that come up that are sort of largely associated with the sharing economy in the United States and Western Europe are more fundamental labor market-wide issues, in the global South. I've seen, the conversation in the US and Western Europe has largely been around should, drivers on platforms be considered employees or contractors. I think the more important issue, and the issue that this is really trying to address, this categorization of work, is in the providing the safety net to all forms of work. In a lot of developed and sort of more advanced countries have set up their labor protections tied to this one work arrangement, employment. And so when they have a different work arrangement, they don't have a way of extending the safety net. And so they say, well, let's just categorize them as employees. And there's a third category of policy issues which doesn't get enough airtime, and so I'm just going to sort of throw it out there, which has to do with risk management for small businesses, for micro businesses. When COVID hit, a lot of Airbnb hosts lost most of their revenue.
Yep.
A lot of Uber drivers lost most of their revenue. They're not at the scale where they can seek bankruptcy protection. They're not employed, and so they can't seek unemployment benefits without, sort of an act of government. And so the, to Dilip's point, certainly, I heard earlier in the session of the extension of unemployment benefits to informal work. I think that's a really good move in the right direction. But I think we have to think more broadly about how do we protect individuals in a world where the individual is not an employee, but is taking on certain kinds of business risk that used to be held by a large entity, but doesn't have the safety net to either get benefits or to sort of protect themselves from large adverse events.
And Dilip, would you say that the dynamics you've identified in the global South or in developing economies are generalizable? Do they commonly appear from developing economy to developing economy as policy issues relating to the intersection of sharing economy and labor market?
Yes, absolutely. That's the point I was trying to make. That the regulations are and the issues are very similar. It is just that in the South, the global South, the issues come with more challenges. And on top of everything, I'm glad you brought up the issue about the social benefits, unemployment insurance, pensions, as well as wage protection, protection from wage theft. These kind of issues are very much there in the South, much more prevalent in the South. I think one issue that comes to mind when I'm thinking about, let's say, 10 years ahead on this issue of sharing economy, two issues. One is this whole issue of privacy and data mining, and related to that, somebody's lifetime savings could be stolen. They wouldn't even know that it has happened to them. That is more likely to happen in the global South than in the global North. So you need policies as well as you need mechanisms and instruments to handle that. The second issue is that looking ahead 10 years, 1 billion people are joined. So in 2 decades, 1 billion people will join the working age population in developing countries. 1 billion more working age people will join the workforce, or they would be looking for work. How are you going to provide employment for all those people when unemployment rate is already too high in these places? What that means is that a lot of these workers will flock to big cities, both in their own country and abroad. They will keep coming to Europe and to the US and everywhere. They would be milling around. So when you have a large number of people that come in at the same time that countries don't want so many people to come, so immigration controls are being tightened, that will lead to more irregularity, more gig work, more loss of protection, more vulnerability, and we need to begin to think about that somehow. So one way to blur the distinction between formal and informal is to redefine what is formal, and then say Uber workers are contract workers. Fine, that is one way of handling it. But associated with that, providing the right kind of benefits, education is also very important.
Absolutely.
Another aspect, and this is where I don't want to take too much of your time because I want you, the expert, to speak more. One aspect that is really not thought through in the sharing economy context, but I get those questions because I am considered apparently I know something about payments industry. If you employ people, you have to pay them. Sharing economy means paying through digital means. You cannot pay anybody digitally unless that person has somehow had a connection with a bank account. And there are more than 1 billion people without bank account. So the sharing economy, what we see is the success story of a few companies making a lot of money. We have seen also many drivers and renters, both consumers as well as those with houses and all renting out on Airbnb, for example, quite happy. Yes, that is true. But I think, so the payments industry has not really caught up with the challenges of the future of work situation. The so-called digital nomads are still concentrated in Portugal, in Lisbon, or on the coast of Lisbon, or in Barbados. Mm-hmm. That's because the payment system is there. You need to think about how to address the oligopolistic structure, the lack of competition, the high cost of being able to pay somebody, especially cross-border, and especially for poor people. That is one issue that has to be addressed through policy. The other big thing is that the platform play, the big platform providers, they have invested, they have the first mover advantage, and the moment somebody has a first mover advantage, they become oligopolistic, they become monopolistic, they take market share, and then they start charging through through everything, right? So what can we do to stop this oligopolistic business, which is basically now affecting all our lives? Right now, I can see everybody is somehow connected to technology. And most of the technology is oligopolistic. So that is a big issue that is coming up that we need to address.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've identified a number of categories of policy considerations, 2, 3, depending on how you count. When you look out there at the governments around the world, who's doing it right? Or who's doing a part of it right? What lessons or best practices can we draw from different regulatory initiatives or leadership that certain countries are showing? We'll start with you, Arun.
I think at a very high level, the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of governments is to initially say, let's categorize all work as full-time employment. Mm-hmm. I think that's the wrong approach. And so thankfully, there have been examples of countries and jurisdictions moving past this to say, well, let's fashion a funding mechanism for the social safety net, for unemployment benefits, for other kinds of benefits, for healthcare, for retirement, that is targeted not just at employees, but is targeted at all work arrangements. I think Washington State and New York, to some extent California, through Proposition 22, they've created experiments. So it's too early to say if these are successes or not, but at least they've recognized that you have to decouple the employment work arrangement from the sort of receiving of these essential safety net and benefits. The government of Chile has tried to do that, the United Kingdom. I think a broader issue that, I think every government should think about, and, I'm happy to be saying this in the UAE because, there's always been a lot of leadership from this government on cutting edge technology policy issues. It has to do with the holding of capital, like, sort of the ownership of the thing that keeps giving returns. And, I was excited when Airbnb first emerged because I saw it as decentralizing capital in the short-term accommodation industry. You don't have big hotels and a bunch of labor. You have millions of small entrepreneurs who are actually building customer relationships, building brand, sort of know-how. They're sort of holding that structural capital. I think with the rise of AI, we are seeing that extension of that holding of capital threat extend not just to people who run businesses, but to everybody. Because if our human capital starts to be embedded in centralized AI systems, we start to lose a different form of capital. And, I was at Jensen Huang's talk this morning where he talked about this as being an important issue. But over time, I think these labor issues that have been highlighted by the sharing economy are going to blur a little with the intellectual property and human capital issues that we're only scratching the surface of with artificial intelligence and someone's ownership over not just their means of production, but their creative process and their way of thinking.
Yeah, the implications of AI for all of this are pretty profound. So Dilip, we've got a minute and a half. I'll give you the same question. It's a good way to go out. Who's doing it right? In what ways? And whose examples should we look at?
So I would actually take the opportunity to say a couple of things. One is, who is doing right depends on the metric. And if metric is money, then the many platform players are doing very well. Many consumers are also happy. But is that the metric? I'm not sure. So what should be the metric in the case of, like informal economies or in the case of sharing economies? It's not clear. Rights of people is very important. Making sure they don't become like nerds and they don't become socially ineptitude. They don't become antisocial. These are all important things. So I think that is coming. Now, one of the things that I'm the sort of the optimist type, I sort of think about, okay, what are other sort of big sources, big assets that are lying around, but they're not being touched by the sharing economy or by anybody. And again, thinking about development finance or financing of the poor in poor countries and financing of poor countries in general, that's one of my passions. I think about some possibilities. Where are the little pools of money lying around? Where are the assets that are lying around that we can monetize? One that comes to mind, and I wrote an opinion piece about that in the Guardian newspaper a while ago. It was about art, let's say African art. Do you know that about half to 2/3 of African art collected by the major museums in the world are sitting in the basement? They are sitting in the basement. That can be monetized. And I have written about the idea of a foreign direct investment kind of sharing possibility. I know people will say this is not possible, but everybody thought Uber wouldn't be able to take the medallion market in taxi market in New York either, right? And they did that everywhere in the world. So it is something to think about. The other asset, so that takes us to creative assets, creative industry, and intellectual property, right? The music from West Africa kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. There is the other one that Muhammad Yunus also talks about a lot, about corporate social responsibility in the form of patents that a lot of multinationals have purchased just for the purpose of preventing competition. And that is lying around unused as well. Why can't we somehow make those patents available, especially when there is a pandemic, for example?
Yeah.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, these both seem like ideas that I'm going to give my entrepreneurship students because they both seem sort of extremely promising.
Yeah, terrific. Well, we got a lot done in 20 minutes. I want to thank everybody and thank these two gentlemen in particular.
Thank you.